Okay, hi everybody. Today we're going to look at international trade and we're going to look at three learning intentions, and they are to explain specialisation and the law of comparative advantage, to calculate the law of comparative advantage, and to compute the two examples for terms of trade. In other words, the two ways it can come up in questions. So first and foremost, we're going to look at absolute and comparative advantage. So absolute advantage is the ability of a country to produce more of a good using fewer factor inputs than another country. So what that basically means is they are better at producing or more efficient at producing goods. Comparative advantage then slightly different. It's the ability of a country to produce a product at a lower opportunity cost. Okay, so they're relatively more efficient. That's very important. Relatively more efficient than another country. So it reflects the opportunity cost, in other words. So the definition for the law of comparative advantage, or LOCA, states that if a country is best at producing both goods, that it should specialise, okay, in the production of the good which it's relatively most efficient. Alright, that's important. And trade for the remainder of its requirements. So what specialisation is then, is a country should produce the good which it's most efficient at and trade for the rest of its needs. So in other words, both countries will be better off due to this, and we'll show you a worked example of that. Okay, so before we go through the worked example, we're going to look at the assumptions underlying the law of comparative advantage. Now, some of these don't actually make sense in real world terms, but these are the assumptions for the law of comparative advantage, so you need to know them to go through a worked example. So transport costs are not included. So Ireland is an island, so for example, transport costs will be high, so the benefit of the law of comparative advantage will be lessened in our case. Free trade exists, alright, so it's assumed that free trade exists. That's not always so. So it exists in the EU, but not with the rest of the world. It's assumed that workers are occupationally mobile, if you can remember from our labour chapter. That's assumed the workers can easily move from one job to another. Again, that's not always possible because there might need retraining or upskilling. So constant returns to scale are assumed. So it's assumed that you double the resources, you double the output. But again, not always the case, because the law of diminishing marginal returns applies. So marginal output will eventually fall, but that's not taken into account. It's assumed that all extra resources are available. So if you're moving from food to clothing, are the resources available to do so? Strategic goods, right? Countries prefer to produce certain goods because of their importance to the country. So for example, the ESB, even though they are not efficient producers, okay, so they wouldn't be included really in the law of comparative advantage. Okay, so if we looked at a worked example here, the two main assumptions we need to remember are the constant returns to scale and that workers are occupationally mobile. So every question you get, you're going to have two goods in two countries. So you've got Spain and Portugal here, and you've got the production of orange and wine. Okay, so we can clearly see that Spain is the most productive of both oranges and wine, but again we have to find out which is it best at. So we can see that Spain is 4 times more efficient at producing oranges, where it's only 3 times more efficient at producing wine. So what that means is Spain should concentrate on producing oranges because it's relatively most efficient. Okay. So if we look at the figures after specialisation then, all Spanish workers now produce oranges, so production is assumed to double in that situation. And all Portuguese workers now produce wine, so their production is assumed to double. So again, remember this point we talked about, the assumptions, the law of comparative advantage, constant returns to scale, and workers are occupationally mobile. So Spain's orange production doubles from 1,000 to 2,000, Portugal goes to 0, so our total output then is 2,000. Where Spain's wine now has gone to 0 because everyone produces oranges. Portugal's wine doubles from 700 to 1,400, so total output has gone up to 1,400. So the world is always better off in these situations, and every question you look at will have a similar scenario. So orange production is up 60%, so it's up 750 as a percentage of the original total output before specialisation. Wine production is down, so wine production is down 50%, so again that's 1,400 as a production of the total output at the start before specialisation. So simple enough, the gain in orange production, alright, this is going to be your sentence for every single one, the gain in orange production outweighs the loss in wine production, okay, so the world is better off. And that sentence will be in every single question you look at. So if we look at a full typical leaving cert example here, again, very similar idea. So we can see China is best at producing bulk goods. So it's best at producing food and it's best at producing clothing. But if we look at the figures here, it's only 1.5 times better at producing food, whereas it's twice as efficient at producing clothing. Okay, so if we simply draw in figures here, I'm just going to block it out. So China's not going to produce food anymore, so that goes to 0, and this is going to double to 40. Okay, UK is not going to produce clothing anymore, so that's going to go to 0, and this one's going to double to 80. So what's happened here then is total has increased by 10 here, okay, and total has decreased by 20 here, okay. But again, you're looking at the percentages. All right, so the increase in clothing, right, is 10 over the original amount, 30, which is 33.33%, whereas decrease in food is 20 over 100, the original amount, okay, which is 20%. So again, world is better off. Okay, and that's what it has in the marking scheme. Alright, the output of clothing increased by 33.3%, output of food decreased by 20. So the increase in output of clothing greater than decrease in food, so the world is better off. So you don't actually have to do the figures out. I like to do the figures out because I think it focuses you more, and you can use them then if you ever actually are asked for figures after specialisation, which can be asked in some questions. Okay, so when we're talking about terms of trade here, calculate terms of trade for bulk goods, you are using your figures from the original question, so your before specialisation questions, and you literally just take it from the UK first, or whatever country's first, China second, okay, and you literally divide the figures into each other left and right. So how many times does 40 go into 10, and how many times does 10 go into 40? Okay, so for the UK, 1 unit of food is the equivalent of 0.25 units of clothing, so that is 10 divided by 40. And then you do the opposite. 1 unit of clothing is the equivalent of 4 units of food. And again, that is 1 food, 40 divided by clothing, 10, so 4. And you do the exact same for China then. 1 unit of food is equal to 0.33. So that is 20 divided by 60. And then 1 item of clothing is equal to 3 units of food. So that is 60 divided by 20. Okay, so our possible terms of trade then, and these have to be bartered for. So food lies between 0.25 and 0.3 units of clothing, and clothing lies between 4 units of food and 3 units of food. So there are your terms of trade for food and clothing. Our second terms of trade question is given in this scenario where you're given a table with the index of export prices, the index of import prices, and you're asked for the terms of trade for one particular year. And your formula here for terms of trade then is very simple. It's the index of export prices over the index of import prices multiplied by 100. Alright. Okay, so your solution here then is your definition. A country's terms of trade is the ratio of its export prices to import prices, or you just put in the formula, both are acceptable. And then you literally just plug the figures into the formula. So 96.6 over 98.7 multiplied by 100 equals 97.9. So a very, very simple question. Once again, you know the formula. Okay, so just to recap what we've covered in international trade today, we've explained specialisation in the law of comparative advantage, we've calculated the law of comparative advantage, and we've computed both examples for the terms of trade. Okay, thanks and see you next time.